Hello, and welcome to Parsley and Sage, the gardening podcast to grow by. I'm Pam Pooley.
And I'm Jean Farewell.
And we're here to share what we've learned from digging and designing,
Weeding and planting,
watering,
feeding,
figuring,
finessing,
loving the land,
and all things green.
So let's grow. Hello, everyone. Today and in our next episode, we're going to focus on the wide variety of ornamental and native grasses. These are ones that Jean and I landscape with in colder climates, and we want to share with you all their many uses in your gardens. The grasses we are discussing are perennial, and their foliage can be left standing throughout the winter for visual interest. First off, I'd like to share or clarify some definitions. So, Jean, first, I'm going to just start with what an ornamental is. It's a term that we use to describe plants that are propagated and grown primarily for aesthetic rather than functional qualities. The term is typically used to describe plants that do not occur naturally in our region. They grow somewhere else, and that somewhere else may be a very different environment and ecosystem than ours here, such as the jungles of Asia, Africa, or the mountains of Europe.
Right. Then we have the term native, which we should clarify. It refers to a plant species that occurs naturally in a region and a habitat over the course of evolutionary time. So, because they originated in a particular region, these species are adapted to growing conditions and have, in a sense, co-evolved with the other native species of wildlife.
That's right. And in our next episode, we'll talk about native grasses. Today, we'll be focusing on ornamentals, and there are many what we call cultivars. These are cultivated varieties of each species that are grown by the nursery industry. And in the past 5 years, there's been an explosion of cultivars in the trade of grasses. Cultivars of both ornamental and native species are available in the majority of plant nurseries. So let's get started on the ornamentals, but we even have to touch on some that aren't even that well behaved.
I bet you're referring to miscanthus, Pam. Maiden grass, Japanese silvergrass. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, I was joking a bit. Miscanthus can be a bad actor. It's a grass that is used widely. People love it. It's invasive because it spreads by seeds and rhizomes, and it can escape from the ornamental planting in your yard and form large clumps that displace native vegetation in places like meadows and sunny sites. So we just have to plant it with awareness. Nursery labels show it as an invasive, which is very interesting. They are native to lowlands in Japan, Korea, and China, and honestly, they're no small varieties, so they really take up a lot of space in the garden. They grow from 4 to 12 feet tall, depending on the variety. The smallest is Adagio, which is it really is a nice-looking grass. It has very thin stems. Like all the other miscanthuses, they grow in upward arching stems that give them a fountain-like appearance. And then, from August to October, the tapered tips bloom with tan or pinkish red feathery panicles that are really quite beautiful. I happen to even really like one called Dixie, and it's really a dramatic addition to a garden, and it can take up a lot of space.
Well, and that's a problem I have with some of these larger grasses, Pam. They really could be a challenge to maintain because it's difficult dividing them or cutting them back. So if you're willing to tie them together in a bundle, these are the full-grown grasses, 4 or 6 feet tall or more, very wide. You tie them together in a bundle, and then you take an electric hedge trimmer to them if you want to do it that way. Then you can cut them down. Mm-hmm. But these big grasses, such as miscanthus, do spread. They form dead hollows in the middle. So you have to really be dividing them on a regular basis. And sometimes it can take 2 people with 2 pitchforks between them trying to separate and unearth these big grasses. But how do you control miscanthus from spreading?
Well, I think just like what you said, when you see it, you spot it in the garden reseeding, that's when you should just take action and remove it right away. Sadly, I've seen miscanthus in protected spaces on a preserve because the seed heads traveled from someone else's nearby backyard. And that's the kind of upsetting spread. I've even seen it in California in like wild areas. And that's what we mean by invasive. It pushes out the native plants that are there. So you might say, why even use miscanthus? But when it's used in in ways that you can control it. It looks really good, especially around a contemporary home. It's quite dramatic in large stands. And if you can make sure you, yes, at the end of the season or in the spring, cut it down with a big, like a hedge clipper, it just adds a lot of drama to the garden.
What can you say in terms of some other warm season grasses that are a little more better behaved?
Yeah, well put. I mean, there are many, and so let's touch on some like the miscanthus. These are grasses that really grow when things warm up. All right, when the temperatures are 60 to 65 degrees. So you're not going to see them early in the season. They're just going to look like they're just waking up. The familiar varieties that many of us use in our garden are the pennisetums. That's commonly known as fountain grass, and they happen to be native to Eastern Asia and Australia. They bloom too like a fountain, and they come in much more variety of sizes. This is a great alternative to miscanthus. There's a very small one that I've used called Little Bunny. They're just 10 to 12 inches high. I've even used this as a ground cover and surrounded by taller plants. It really works nicely too in a rock garden. It can take dry conditions. A really popular one is Pennisetum Hamlin. That's Hamlen. The pennisetums don't have as large inflorescence. That's the flower head as miscanthus. They look like little bristles, and they're sometimes called bottle brush plumes. These are buff colored. I've heard people describe these grasses as beachy. They sway attractively in the breeze. Foxtrot is an interesting cultivar too. It grows to 4 feet with more rosy or black colored inflorescences, which is really quite stunning. So there are many varieties, but some are just not zone hardy around here.
Meaning, of course, it's too cold for them to survive in the coldest temperatures in the Northeast winters.
That's correct. I loved one called Carly Rose, and it was just so pretty. It had rose-colored blooms, but it's for a zone 6. And we're here in the Hudson Valley. Often online, I see that we're designated a zone 6, but in reality, we're really more of a zone 5. It gets just too cold and just kills the roots for Carly Rose. Though the one thing about it is I could use it in a container, say. Consider using it as an annual. There's nothing wrong with that. I had a similar problem with the cold temperatures with a gorgeous grass that some people can get to grow here. It's called pink muhly grass.
I've had that.
Muhlenbergia.
Yeah.
It has purple flower stalks that bloom in like this amazing delicate cloud, but I also have to use it as an annual. It's adapted to some southern climates in North America, but it's also lives in Mexico and Guatemala. So it's used to warmer weather.
Yes. I've put the pink muhly grass in containers and thought of them as annuals too, but I have to have them because they're gorgeous.
That's true.
But strange about the zones. I mean, I have many things on my property that are labeled zone 6, and they do fine. They're still there after years. But that pink muhly grass, if they say zone 6, I think they really mean zone 7 because it has never survived a winter. So
Interesting.
I wonder about the zones. Maybe they're not that specific to each particular plant.
Could be.
Yeah. But these are, okay, they're warm season grasses, meaning they look great in late summer and fall, which is actually now while we're taping this episode. Mm-hmm. But what about the cool season grasses that grow and bloom in the early summer, Pam?
Yes, we have to talk about those. There are not as many dynamic ones to design with, but I have to discuss 2 cool season ornamental ones that really stand out, and gardeners ought to try them. One is Calamagrostis, that's feather reed grass. This is an amazing grass. It does grow quite vertically, tall to about 6 feet. The one that everyone talks about is Calamagrostis Carl Forrester. And that hails from a cross of grasses from Europe and Asia. It was the first ornamental grass to receive the Perennial Plant of the Year award. It has long-lasting plumes, green foliage that grows into a neat 2-foot clump, and in early spring it rises up right away. It's capped with beautiful elongated wheat-colored seed heads, and it tolerates heavy clay and compacted soil. It does not reseed. The seeds are believed to be sterile. But, it's a great plant. So later in the season, it really does have that just wheat-colored look all around. Not only the seed heads, but the stems. And It still looks good in a garden, but it's really rather dormant later in the season. Mm-hmm. It integrates well, though, in a perennial bed, nonetheless. But keep in mind, it's quite narrow. It's narrow. So it's important to plant it near plants, I believe, that have a fuller habit. Use it in the back of the border. I've seen it used in a line, but to me that looks like soldiers in a battle formation.
Right, you have to be careful with that. I mean, sometimes you want the sort of spiky, vertical architectural element, and that really does coordinate well with clean, modern lines if you want that look, if you have that look.
Yes.
But more often than not, you do have to soften the vertical, the spiky, narrow profile with something that's a little fuller. So what about some other cool season grasses?
So another really cool one is used really often by the renowned landscape designer Piet Oudolf. He always uses Discampsia cepitosa. I don't even know what its common name is. I think it's tufted hairgrass. That's it, tufted hairgrass. Discampsia is Champsia. It's only 1.5 feet tall, and it sends up long stalks in early summer that are topped by a multitude of airy light green inflorescences. It comes from Eurasia and parts of North America, but it's interesting because this species, it likes damp habitats, including estuaries, moist meadows, ponds, and stream buffers, and marshy grasslands. So if you had like a wet area on your property, even a little shady, it can take that. It's really a pretty cool plant. It has like a mounding habit, and after it blooms, which is early in the season, you can cut out the bloom and you get this nice soft green bunch grass that remains. And so I think that it's really can be a nice ground cover type plant.
Well, there are grasses to suit any situation, aren't there, including shade?
This is true. I think that the best option in the shade is another ornamental, Japanese forest grass.
Right.
Hakenkloa. It's an amazing grass. It's really good. You use that. I've seen it in your garden.
Yeah, and I have some bright yellow green that it really does brighten up shady corners. I have to confess, Pam, from a design standpoint, I'm sort of a latent lover of grass because I was always more interested in flowers, and I thought, grass is flowers are more material, and they, stronger statement. But grasses can add a dreamlike quality to your landscape, and they create this kind of blurry, amorphous, softening effect, almost impressionistic. So they create a totally different atmosphere than straight flowers. And that wispy and feathery look just can create quite a beautiful, airy quality. And as you mentioned earlier, seeing the grasses waving in the wind is very lovely.
That's so true. I mean, I think that grasses add that vertical relief, they're especially the taller ones. They mix well with perennials, and in the warm season, a lot of your perennials are dying back. And I found that sometimes I've looked at gardens that I've worked on, and that like the late season is just pretty dull. That certainly I've been starting to use asters and even goldenrods more for color. But the grasses, if you have different varieties, they offer such textural interest, as you mentioned. Their inflorescence catch sunlight, especially in the waning days of summer. And in terms of installation, I have to say I've begun to integrate grasses by even starting them in a design, like thinking it out. I'll place the grasses in the back or the middle of a bed, either lined up with a lot of space in between them or zigzag through the bed. And then I'll think about the plants that will fill in those spaces, putting plants of perennials or even annuals in groupings near the grasses. So it can be a dominant plant in this sort of matrix mix. You have a repetition in the garden, and it'll be the only thing that's standing and really doing something as you get into October maybe. So that's a real plus.
And they look good planted in large masses as a tall ground cover. They can be used to create a distinctive border. They look appealing with a contemporary dwelling.
That's right.
Yeah, they have a lot of pluses.
This is true.
And while many flowers actually, after they bloom, have foliage perhaps that is not that marvelous interesting, your grasses they go steadily all season with their look.
That's exactly right. So we'll continue this discussion in our next episode. We're going to talk about great native grasses. So stay tuned. That wraps up today's garden conversation. We would like to answer your gardening questions on the show. So please message us on Instagram at Parsley and Sage Podcast, or visit our website at parsleyandSagePodcast.com. Thank you for joining us. I'm Pam Pooley.
And I'm Jean Farewell for Parsley and Sage. Happy digging!